So you're celebrated as perhaps the most essential originator of techno as an art form. Some credit you with coining the word techno. How do you experience all of that? And like, how does it feel to be here at IMS where people are gathered here around techno?
It's kind of amazing. I mean, like when I started, I mean, I had no idea of like that I would even leave the city of Detroit to and now 40 years later, I'm sitting in Ibiza in front of a group of people talking to a lovely lady, and I'm still taking it all in. Actually, believe it or not.
Yeah. No, I imagine that must feel incredibly surreal. As someone at the center of techno history, how do you feel about the way the story is commonly told? Like, do you feel that there's anything people tend to get wrong, or any parts of the story that are left out?
Well, it depends on what you mean by how it's commonly told. I mean, every country that I go to, there's a different version of this story. So, which one are you referring to?
Well, I want to talk about your version of the story.
Sorry?
I want to talk about your version of the story. That's why we're here. So maybe we can go back to the beginning, when you grew up in Detroit in the 70s and the 80s. So at this point, the race riots, which were...
Oh, wow, that's before my time.
But, I mean, that was like the late 60s, but that had already left the city like pretty divided.
Yeah, but one thing about that is that what happened as a result of that is that FM had not yet been developed fully yet. This was like what, the end of the 60s or something. So they allocated, the government allocated a station, a radio station to the black community, which was a station called WGPR. And there was only 3 stations on the FM dial at that time: WGPR, WLL, WRIF, and another one I can't remember. The other 2 were like rock, album-oriented rock. And this 3rd station was for the black community. I guess you could call it an urban station, R&B station. And around 1977, Electrifying Mojo appeared on this radio station. And Electrifying Mojo was an iconic DJ. At the time, there was no format. Like DJs, what music you heard on the show depended on what DJ was on at the time. And they had full reign to play whatever they basically wanted to play. And so this guy Mojo was playing. This is the first place where I heard like P-Funk, Kraftwerk, Gary Newman. All of this stuff was all mixed together. I mean, America, Horse with No Name. I mean, he would back that up with a James Brown, Papa Got a Brand New Bag, stuff like this. And it really created a certain atmosphere in Detroit. And it was no other DJ in the country like Mojo. There's no other station like WGPR in the country other than here in Detroit. So that was one of the good things about what happened after the riots.
Sure. Yeah, I know the Electrifying Mojo was really influential for a lot of people at that time.
Yeah. It was a big influence on my music. I mean, we listened to him religiously every night. And to this day, I believe that if Mojo wasn't there, I wouldn't be here right now.
Do you feel that, I mean, obviously radio had a really powerful role in shaping the early techno canon. Do you feel like anything has filled that void since, I mean, it seems like there are very few radio stations or like radio presenters like Mojo who are doing that?
No, once they got rid of the I guess what you call a personality DJ, then radio kind of became a wasteland to me. I mean, it's like, I remember taking a record to the radio station in Detroit, and they couldn't make the decision to play the record or not because they were being programmed out of New York or LA. And, so they had to check with somebody that wasn't even living in the city to figure out what they had to play. And so from that point, it's like it became kind of dead, so to speak. And then, then the internet came along and kind of changed all that, where you weren't at the mercy of the local radio station for new and innovative music.
Well, around the time that Mojo was still DJing, my understanding is that you started out in funk bands, right? Before you even started playing or making techno.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was in middle school, actually, this was mid-'70s. And at the time, this was like funk music was real big. It was coming into like the disco era, which to me, disco was sort of an extension. There was a lot of funk bands that like their second album, it was all disco. There's a lot of funk bands that kind of changed into doing disco. And so this was at a time where this was like before synths became affordable to the average person like me. And so you would have to, like, if you wanted to create a band or something or make music more or less, you had to hook up. There was always like a bass player down the street, drummer around the corner, guitar player, a couple of blocks away. So we would always meet up and it was always like a garage that, the parents didn't mind us coming in and making all that noise in their garage. And so it's like if you walk through the neighborhood during these years, you could walk through the neighborhood or ride your bike or whatever through the neighborhood and always run into like a group of people standing around somebody's garage watching the players in there. So I played a couple of those bands. That was sort of a start for me. Yeah.
Have you ever seen the documentary A Band Called Death?
Sorry?
A Band Called Death?
No.
It's about a punk band called Death that's from Detroit. It's like
really?
three brothers who were playing together around the same time. I thought maybe you would have recognized it.
No, I can't say that I'm familiar with that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, did the funk sensibility transfer over into...
Definitely. I mean, that's my roots. I mean, it's like, and I think even to this day, I think a large part of the foundation or the bedrock of my music is funk music, and like what it's like hype with the technology and the electronics that are involved now. It's like high tech funk music.
So you finally got your hands on keyboards. You were making music in the back of a music shop, right? And you started putting some demos together. Can you?
Yeah. Well, I actually, my first instrument was a guitar, actually electric guitar. My father bought me an electric guitar for my 10th birthday, and it was a Swingerland guitar where the amplifier was the amplifier was built into the guitar case. And another little side story, Gary Scheider from Funkadelic offered to buy that guitar from me later on, and but I didn't sell it to him. Oh. But it's a classic guitar, and I started playing that. Then I was in the music store and I saw a bass guitar that I like, a Rickenbacker. It was a Rickenbacker copy, so I started playing bass. Then I talked my brother into getting drums for Christmas, because I had my brother was 10 years younger, not 10 years, 10 months apart, and so I would always talk him into asking our parents for some other instrument, but really it was what I wanted. I just couldn't ask for too many things for myself, and so basically, long story short, is. Eventually, when they rolled out the synth, the mono synth that was affordable for, 11, 12-year-old kid. And let me back this story up a little bit. My grandma had a Hammond B3 organ, and I used to come home from school and play on this Hammond B3 organ. This was actually even before I got the guitar and drums and all of that stuff. And eventually all of this stuff kind of intertwined, and I was able to talk her into buying me. She would take me with her to the keyboard shop, store called Grinnell's, where they were selling accessories and sheet music and stuff for this organ. And in the back room, they had eventually opened up a synth room. So every time I was with her getting sheet music, I'd be back in the back in the synth room. And on this particular synth, the Korg MS-10 caught my eye. And so I was able to talk her into getting this Korg for me. So I think it was either for Christmas one year or for my birthday one year. It's like maybe my 12th, 13th birthday, maybe even 14th birthday. So. And so yeah, she surprised me and got it. And from that point on, man, with that Korg MS-10, I spent hours in my bedroom with this Korg MS-10 because, with a synthesizer, I don't know how many people know exactly what a synthesizer does or what, the intricacies of a synth. But it's basically a oscillator. And you can filter the oscillator, which sends out sound waves, and you can, there's a noise oscillator that you can filter. If you put the right filter on it, you can make a kick drum, you can make cymbals, you can make snares, electronic. So I was making my own drum kits with this Korg, and eventually I put all of this stuff together, and I also, I stuck my bass guitar in there a little bit sometimes. I started doing these demos where I had 2 cassette decks, and I would bounce. I would start out usually with a drum sound. That I didn't use the electronic drum kit for everything because it was like it's kind of really all over the place if you just playing drum sounds with your hand. So there was an album that was released out at that time called Drum Drops, and all it was really was drum patterns, like a rhythm track album. And so I start out with this track from one of these drum track patterns, and then I'd play a bass synth or whatever over the top, and keep overdubbing, recording back and forth till eventually I had a whole song at the end. And that was one of the things that I'm known for is the quality of my productions, because I learned how to EQ the drums with enough bass filtered out. So by the time it got to the end of like 4 or 5 overdubs, there was still enough, it kind of evened out, because each overdub added a generation that would muddy up any sounds, especially bass sounds that recorded at the beginning. So you'd have to usually EQ all of the bass out, and by the time you got to the end, it was balanced just right. So anyway, I know this is all kind of boring stuff for you guys, probably.
Not boring. No, it's amazing you.
Let me know if I get too ahead of myself.
No.
Yeah, okay.
No, I mean, it's amazing you kind of refined that process already from such a young age.
Yeah. And so this was basically was all done with this Korg MS-10. So it was all electronic, and it was self-made. So by this time, I'm in a senior in high school, junior high school, and I'm taking this course called Future Studies, which it was the study about the future, basically. and how technology and the technological revolution would eventually be the norm, and how, you know, the close of the industrial revolution transcend into a technological revolution. And this was future studies, and the reference manual for future studies was Alvin Toffler. Future Shock was, that was the reference book. But he later on wrote a book, this is basically after I graduated, called The Third Wave. But since I had read Future Shock in high school, I picked up The Third Wave, which was a continuation of Future Shock. And that's where, you know, most of my techno terminology came from, out of reading Alvin Toffler and his take on the technological revolution and how it would affect society and the world going forward.
Well, I actually did want to talk about Alvin Toffler because I know that he was really influential to you. I'm not super familiar with him, and there might be people here who aren't either. So could you kind of outline what his key ideas were, or which ones you really took into your music making?
Well, in particular, the word Metroplex, which is the name of my first, well, not my first label, but when I went solo, I named my label Metroplex. And what the word Metroplex comes from is from the metropolitan complex, which shortly became the Metro Complex, and then it became Metroplex. And what that is what, this is straight out of Alvin Toffler, one of his readings, I guess, that two cities, like you take Detroit and you take Chicago, and eventually the cities would grow so big that they would grow into each other and become a metro complex or a metroplex.
Interesting.
So that was kind of I said, man, that would be a cool name for a label.
It is a cool name for a label.
Yeah. So that's how, that was one of the things that I kind of took to. And also, now that we mention it, we're working on an app right now called Techno Tech. Yes, and one of the things that was in Alvin Toffler, he would talk about the electronic village, or the techno cottage, or the electronic cottage, techno village. I have to brush up and go back and look. But what that is that what he said was that work would be decentralized. Like people would not, in the future, would not work at a central location.
Interesting.
You know, the work would be panned out like at home. A lot more people would be at home. So now there's things that are like where a company would, like, instead of having a bunch of employees at some kind of central office somewhere, you know, you fly a team to a city and you need like amenities in that city. So, you know, you have a cottage or something where like toiletries and things like that, food, you know, is kind of panned out instead of, you know, you going into the office and get a paycheck, then go home and do all of this stuff, you know, whereas, and then you have to relocate. So I don't know, it's just making sense, but.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're actually seeing that happen now.
Yeah, it's all coming into fruition right now. Yeah. And you know, this was like in high school when I first learned about things like this.
Well, a lot of Detroit techno artists had a special interest in sci-fi. What is it about this city and the producers that have come from it that have been so compelled by sci-fi? What is it about sci-fi that's been so compelling to techno producers, specifically coming out of Detroit?
Well, I mean, sci-fi for me is I've always loved sci-fi because it's talking about future possibilities, so to speak. I mean, like the Jetsons was sci-fi. I don't know if anybody remember the Jets or know even what the Jetsons are.
Oh yeah, of
But
course.
do you know?
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, as long as you know, that's cool. And it's like I was like a big fan of the Jetsons and stuff like that. I read a lot of different other types of sci-fi, and what it is about sci-fi is kind of synonymous with technology and advancement of civilization, because most sci-fi is always usually talking about somewhere in the distant future and how things would be in the distant future. So it's sort of kind of works parallel,
Yeah.
you know.
Once you had started you're making this music, you're in high school, you're taking future studies, you started going out in Detroit, and this is when there was really like the first, there's like a surge of new music coming out. What were these parties like? And I mean, can you paint a picture a little bit of what?
See, that's a lesson. I paid attention in high school,
Yeah. Okay.
so
So you weren't going
that's a
out.
lesson for any youngsters out there. Yeah.
But what?
Sorry. What was,
What was it like to go out in Detroit during this time? You were first making music. You started throwing parties. I know that you had a role in founding the club, the Music Institute. This was all happening around the same time.
Yeah. Well, going to parties was always a part of my culture, I guess you could say, a part of high school or school days. I remember when somebody would throw a party, they used to make the invite on an index card. And on the index card, it would say place, date, mate, and gate. Gate was the address, and they would just make up these. I guess they were early flyers, and there's like basement parties, and every month or so somebody was throwing the bomb basement party, and they make these little index card invites. You go to somebody's basements till the parents kicked everybody out, but. So that's always been a part of intertwined and a part of growing up for me, for kids in my neighborhood, or where I grew up at. So it was nothing. It was just like as we got older, or as we became adults, it just graduated to like a club, or or warehouse or one-off events, and it was just sort of baked into part of growing up in the city, and so eventually, by me being a person that likes music, of course, I also like to play music for other people, and I was always the kid at home that would play all the music at my parents' cocktail parties, or when he had guests over and they needed somebody to play the music. I was always the one that would put the 45 on the spindle and pick which tracks drop on the spindle.
Your first DJ,
Yeah,
DJ booking.
first DJ gig. And so it was just something that was intertwined and embedded with growing up in Detroit.
Did you have a sense at the time that you were part of a movement that would become so big?
No, I'm still surprised, believe it or not.
I know you've reflected in the past that you felt that the scene, like the scene in Chicago, for example, was really different from what was happening in Detroit. Why do you think the techno caught on in Detroit specifically, and there wasn't the same kind of infrastructure that developed elsewhere?
Well, it all has to go back to sort of the transition from funk into disco, and back to a certain degree, and it was some cities that were so more influenced by disco than funk music or any form. And Chicago was one of those cities, and and it was like it was so close in distance, like only like a 4-hour drive. I mean, I know that sounds, by USA standards, that's close distance.
Yeah.
Okay, and so whatever was happening in Detroit kind of bled over to Chicago, and vice versa, and the difference about Chicago is that Chicago was so like heavily into the disco. Like even when radio stations changed their format, some of the urban stations all over the country changed their format to disco, and then a couple of years they went back or changed to a different format. Well, Chicago was one of them cities that stayed on the disco format. Even after disco was dead everywhere else, you could still go to Chicago and hear mixers on the radio. And actually, sometimes we would drive to Chicago on a Friday or Saturday night just to record DJs that was still on the air.
Wow.
Mixing music in Chicago, because they had kind of like fizzled out everywhere else. And the difference is that Chicago was so entrenched in this disco, like Philly International was like the anthem music or the theme music for the whole Chicago movement. Like, all of that Philly International, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, Teddy Pendergrass, stuff like that, MFSB Orchestra, South Soul, and all of that was like a staple in Chicago. Whereas in Detroit, we were more about the future. And that probably mainly because of me, because my music was on the radio and I had influenced, I had a lot of influence over the city.
Yeah.
So because I wasn't, I wasn't caught up in that Chicago sound. So, I mean, we were Detroit, we were techno, and we wasn't thinking about the only similarity was the beat.
Yeah.
Was the four on the floor beat was very interchangeable. It was easy to mix music with that beat, and it was easy to interface with different cities or everybody that was doing 4 on the floor records mixed well with other 4 on the floor records, plain and simple. So, but that was the only similarity to a lot of the early Detroit stuff and Chicago stuff.
Interesting.
Other than that, Detroit was fast forward, where Chicago was still, they still looking for samples of MFSB orchestra strings on their records, and we wasn't having it.
Yeah. Well, you switched that up a little bit when you started Cybotron with Rick Davis, who you met in school.
Yeah.
And your music, specifically the song Clear, is often cited as an essential blueprint for electro. Can you talk about how that project came together?
How Cybotron?
Yeah.
Okay, this has to kind of go back to me getting my first set, and I'm making these beats, and this was right at around the time I was a senior in high school when I started doing these solo demos, so to speak. So when I went to my first year in college, which was community college, called Washtenaw Community College, Ypsilanti, Michigan, I took my demos with me because I was taking basically all music courses. I wasn't thinking about a curriculum. I wasn't trying to take human science and all of this stuff. It was like basically music theory, theater, everything to do with any type of entertainment courses. And there was one class in particular, I think it was music theory class, where I going so like only 12 students in the class, and so I would take my demos. I took my demo, and there was a guy in the class. His name was Rick Davis. And man, Rick Davis was like psychedelic, man. Rick was like straight out of, like he was like Jimi Hendrix reincarnated, on the synth. And so I was fascinated, because he come in with his mirrored sunglasses, and so this guy was kind of fascinating. It turns out that he was a synthesis as well. It was a little bit more advanced than I was, and because he was using, when I was in high school and I was studying, like a record that was out at the time was Donna Summer was big in disco, and her tracks like I Feel Love and Sunset People were like, I was in love with those songs because they were basically techno songs. They were basically electronic songs. So I did my research. I found out the producer was Giorgio Moroder, and I started following him, and I started following his records. And he had an album out called Energy Equal MC Square. And so I'm looking at the credits on the album, see what they're using on there. And he had something on there called the MC500 Micro Composer, which was just a sequencer. It was a rolling sequencer. But at the time, I didn't know this. I thought it was a computer. So I actually took a data processing class in high school to learn about this microcomposer. Well, when I got to college, I found out that a microcomposer was a sequencer because Rick had one. And so like all of my demos were basically, I didn't know nothing about a sync. All of the parts were played by hand. And although they were electronic, it was all over the place because it was, all I had was like maybe a metronome or something to keep the rhythm. And I had to hear it by ear. There was nothing that I can, tap to keep that stuff on beat. And so one day I brought the demos. Everybody fell in love with my demo. And Rick in particular, he was real standoffish at first. He was like, because this was like at the end where, like, going back to where you used to have a group of people to get together to make a band. And so Rick will be in there talking about he never wanted to invite anybody. He didn't want to play with anybody because his experience with, with playing with other people was like nobody was serious enough. He played with guys and, they'd have to, oh, I promised my girlfriend I was going to take her to the movies tonight, so I can't come to rehearsal, And he was kind of fed up with that, so he wasn't into like playing with them, but until he heard my demo. And he said, hey, man, do you want to come over and jam? I said, yeah, cool. Because I was already, he's already kind of talking about all of these techno ideas and everything. So I picked up my little Korg MS-10 and put it under my arm and went to his house. And man, when I went he had his studio situated in his bedroom. And I don't know if he was like playing some kind of mind trick or mind game on me, but it was totally dark in the bedroom. And he had the shades down. And all I could see was the LEDs from the synths and the sequencers and these drum machines that I didn't even know existed. And so it was like going into a cockpit of a spaceship, actually. And I think that, but I see that was I think it was a Jedi mind trick.
Yeah.
That he was playing on me, and but it worked, and and so I went in there and we started jamming the first track. Well, we didn't have a title, but the first track we did was called Cosmic Rain Dance. And then after a while, we started working together. And the next track was called Alleys of Your Mind, which became the A-side of our first single, we formed the name of the group. We formed Cybotron, and we released it. We released Alleys of Your Mind on A side, Cosmic Rain Dance on the B side. And this brings back Electrifying Mojo, because Electrifying Mojo was such an iconic DJ on the radio that was like, you couldn't break music in Detroit without going through Mojo. And we took the record to Mojo, man, and next night after we gave him the record, he played it. And it was like, it was a mind-blowing experience. And I mean, his phones blew up, like every line on his phones in the studio lit up. And people was like, what is that? What is that? What is that? And the rest kind of was like history.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So it wasn't long, obviously, until that sound really took off overseas. And you and a lot of other first wave techno artists were playing at Trésor. There's the infamous Detroit Berlin connection that started. What was that like?
Well, I mean, I guess what I forgot to mention, all during this time, I was going to all of this kind of like evolved while I was in high school. And while I was in high school, I had my younger brother had friends. Derek May and Kevin Saunderson were his friends. But when they came to the house to play with my brother, I became friends with Derek. And Kevin was sort of following Derek. So they were all athletes. My brother, Derek, Kevin, they were all on the football team. And none of them was interested in music until my record played on Electrifying Mojo. Then all of a sudden, they started following me. They started watching. And I can remember at the time, Derek was always saying, man, one day I'm going to make a record. One day I'm going to make a record. And eventually he made it. And then Kevin made one. Then Eddie made one. Then Blake made one. And then it was like, kind of rolled on, like all of the people we hung out with, everybody started making records. And so the techno movement, I guess you could say, officially started with all of these cats making music. Started making music. It's another story that kind of goes along with it, how all this equipment came about and how people really got interested using this gear. But I'm going to save that story for the book.
Okay. Well, when you were first making records, you were using tools and instruments that weren't necessarily made for what you were doing. And I'm curious what your opinion is on the software today that's designed for making electronic music, and like what your opinions are on the state of technology in terms of like production.
Can you ask me that?
What are your thoughts on the tools available to make music nowadays, especially
nowadays?
Yeah.
Oh man, it's limitless. Man, I mean, I'm kind of jealous of producers nowadays, because you guys got the world at your fingers now. At my time, man, it was like sometimes I'd have to trace a patch cord for an hour to only find out that a certain why I wasn't getting sound, because the patch cord was faulty, But now you don't even have to come out of everything. You don't have to really do anything.
Do you think that's like a net positive or a net negative for creativity?
It's negative on one hand because you can get complacent and lazy, and it doesn't stimulate. You know what I mean? It's like you kind of like. It's like if the machines is doing it for you, then you have no real creative input, really. On the other hand, it allows you to actually be able to experiment. If you take the time and put the energy, you have more possibilities at your fingertips. So the object is that just because it's easy doesn't mean it should be easy. If that makes sense.
Definitely.
Right.
Have you stayed loyal to your tools? Or has your creative process evolved as more tools have become available?
Yeah. I would say so. Yeah. I would say so, yes.
Well, I want to talk about briefly a deeper side of your relationship with techno, because a few years ago you did a series of lectures called Respect the Sound.
Right.
And you explored the relationship between techno, physics, and the universe. So coming time back into some sci-fi.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what the core ideas were in this lecture series?
Well, I mean, as I, of course, as long as I've been doing this, eventually, I want to get in deeper of what sound actually is and why certain sounds, certain songs, certain beats, certain rhythms, certain frequencies affect you in certain ways. It's like sometimes I was like, well, I wanted to study, and I like what is it about my music that's not only touching me, but touching other people, because I know for a fact that and sometimes this stuff just comes naturally, that there's a certain sequence of tones that I'll use, not thinking about the actual, not dissecting it or getting into the weeds about it, but there's certain frequencies, a certain sequence of frequencies that affect you in different ways. And what the one song that kind of actually started stimulating my my excitement about this was the song Knee Deep by Parliament Funkadelic by Funkadelic. And it's a line in it that says something about the music. And I'm like, I wanted to know what it is about the music, And so I delved into it, and I started to research, why 436 hertz frequency versus a 440 frequency affects you in a different way,
That's really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was reading an interview you did, and you said that I think that the vibrations that make up sounds definitely affect our mind, our body, and our soul. A lot of people don't understand why certain songs make you sad, certain sounds make you happy, certain sounds evoke different feelings because of vibration.
Yeah.
If you look into how the whole universe was created, they say that the word of God is Om or Amen, which is a vibration, the scientific, spiritual, and musical all connected.
Well, I said that.
Yeah. I was like, that's a very beautiful.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was deep into the studies at that time. Yeah. But no, it's true. I mean, it's like, the pandemic came and I had to put a hold on the lecture circuit. So I haven't brushed up on my terms, but I'm starting to come back now, listening to you.
Well, I hope that you relaunch the lecture series.
Huh? Sorry.
I hope you relaunch the lecture.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think we're doing it in reiterate. I mean, what they did do was allow people to explore. We got locked down, so we had to start doing stuff through video, and so. There's certain ways that, it'll come. Whereas a group of people in a room like this, it'll probably be it won't be the exact same iteration of it, but I like sitting in rooms with a lot of people talking to them. That's kind of therapeutic.
Well, you've been doing some other talks recently. So I know you were at South by Southwest talking about Detroit and this venture that you alluded to earlier called Tech Yes.
Yeah.
So my understanding is this is about bringing a lot of the ethos of underground techno to business.
Yeah.
Can you talk about it?
Well, it's still at the early stage. I don't, and you know, I don't want to get into too much into. I would like to know what I'm talking about when I talk about it. So, right now it's just at the sort of at the proving ground stage. There's a lot of ideas are floating around, but nothing is. I don't have a prototype or something right now at this point that I can present and say, here you go.
Okay.
So we're gonna save that for the later lecture.
Okay. Well, you also collaborated with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, I partnered with them basically to highlight the tech opportunities and entrepreneurial opportunities in the state of Michigan, because it's part of the organization. And they came to me and basically because the whole techno genre kind of developed from Detroit, Michigan. So it was kind of a sort of a obvious connection to, like, if the state of Michigan wants to start giving money out to develop entrepreneurs in tech industry, who better to, sell it, so to speak, for lack of a better way to say it, than Juan Atkins.
Yeah.
So that's how that kind of came along.
Well, I know you've, through all the years, you've maintained a really strong connection to Detroit. And, I wonder, even though techno has become so popular in Europe, for example, I would argue even more popular than in the US. I mean, what's kept you in Detroit after all these years?
What kept me in Detroit? The edge, Detroit. Drinking water, sleeping. Nothing. But Detroit is unlike any other city. It's the city that was because of the auto industry, was the epitome of the industrial revolution. And so therefore it was like one of the first cities, if not the first city in America to evolve or transcend into a technological hub or to usher in the technological revolution. And by living in Detroit, you see all of this, you see this transformation firsthand, and how the auto workers got laid off and then got replaced by robotics and automation. And, all of this is techno coming, man. This is all the stuff that Alvin Toffler talked about. And it was like being in Detroit is like having a first front row seat to that change.
How does it feel in the city now? Because I know it's changed a lot in the last few years. How does it feel to live there now?
It feels great.
Yeah.
I mean, I can do without the weather, but other than that, the atmosphere and the new technology and entrepreneurial vibration is ripe, and it's just like, and the state of Michigan understands this, and I think that they make it, they lay a good fertile ground to plant these seeds and grow.
Techno is an art form inspired by the future. So it's now been around for around 40 years. So where do you think we go from here, and what's next?
Sorry, ask that one time.
So techno is inspired by the future.
Right.
So where do you think techno goes from here? What do you think is next?
And this is one thing I'm studying now, and I don't know how this is affecting. I guess it's kind of a sort of jury's still out, but you have this what you call artificial intelligence now seeping into this technology, and it's like I think that's gonna definitely already, if not already now, playing an unforeseen role in the advancement of technology and how it goes forward.
Do you think in a
Help or hurt or what? No, so I'm gonna let you ask the question. Sorry.
No, I was just going to ask if you think it's playing a positive role or a negative role, or it's...
It could go both ways, I think. I mean, just like anything, it's a double-edged sword, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Well, what are you working on now, and what's next on the horizon? Because I've heard whispers that you're reviving some projects. I see that you have a couple big dates lined up in the next few months.
Well, I mean, we in the last... we've relaunched Cybotron. Just released a single last October. The second single is about to drop like in the next few weeks. I guess, or you call it EP. And so there's new music coming on that front. Also, there's a new Model 500 single at the moment that just got compiled with this Trezor Kraftwerk compilation, and a song called Idol that is very interesting, and that I did during the lockdown. I said, well, yeah, if I'm gonna be locked down in the studio, I might as well come with some interesting frequencies, and this is very interesting, to say the least. And also working on my book for, to answer a lot of these more in-depth questions that you have asked as well.
Okay. Yeah. Looking forward to that.
Sorry?
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. So that's what's on my plate in front of me right now.
Okay. You've done so much with your career. Is there any stone you feel has been left unturned, or anything you still hope to accomplish?
I've always been sort of non-linear, sort of a organic, go with the flow person, and I would hope to think that there was some things that I haven't even seen at this moment that will be exciting coming in the near future and distant future. Yeah.
Well, is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to talk about specifically?
I don't think so.
Really? Well, I think we have some time for other questions from the audience, if anyone has any.
Yeah, there you go. Let's see what the audience wants.
Hey, Juan, how you doing?
Hey.
Thanks so much for this. It's been magical to hear you talk on this. I grew up outside of Glasgow in Scotland, and a lot of our record stores that I would frequent, Rub-a-Dub, 23rd Precinct, were filled with Detroit techno. Yeah. And obviously Glasgow was a big shipbuilding community, suffered the loss and the close of the shipbuilding factories and everything. And I just wondered, like, with those similarities with Detroit, if you had a take on how that influenced the sound of techno, or what that kinship is there between the industry and the sound.
Yeah, for sure. I think the surroundings definitely affect any creative community, the surroundings. And one thing I know about Glasgow is, I always like going to Glasgow, man. They know how to party up there, bro. And it was very, the bleakness, and sometimes, kind of reminds you of Detroit a lot. There's a lot of kinship in the two cities. And I got my record box stolen in Glasgow before, so definitely, it's definitely a kinship to Detroit on that one.
Hi.
Sorry about that.
Hi. Thank you for speaking with us today. It's been really inspirational. My question's a little bit political. So recently, UNESCO has named Berlin Techno as a listed cultural heritage site without mentioning the origins of techno. So I just wanted to know if you were aware of this,
Yeah, we're
and what your
aware.
what your thoughts are.
Yeah, we're aware of it. We just had a big meeting about that a few weeks ago before I left. And it's a touchy subject right now with the Detroit guys, but what I had already know is that we do have a UNESCO designation, but for design and not for music. So that's something we're trying to fix actually as we speak.
Thank you.
To build on that question, first of all, thank you so much for this super deep and informative session. To build on that question, because I'm from Berlin, I would love to hear from you how that relationship with Detroit and Berlin and Tresor and Demi Hegemann and these, like how that's shaped and how you both scenes influenced and nurtured each other. And
Well, Berlin actually is almost one of those cities to me that's similar to like Glasgow. I mean, it's the same kind of, well, in the early days. Now, Berlin now has like, I mean, every time, like, if I go a year without going to Berlin, I don't even recognize the place now when I go. So it's like, I mean, from year to year, man, I like one year I came and all I could see was cranes on the skyline. I mean, everywhere you looked, it was cranes. Then next year I came after that, and all of this stuff had been built from the cranes that were in the sky. So now I see the buildings as a result of the cranes 2 or 3 years. So, but in the early days, I mean, you could get off a plane in Berlin and get off one in Detroit and not know you was in different cities.
and now, when you go, do you still go to Berghain or get inspired by the new
Berghain
sounds?
don't like me, so I don't.
No?
They don't like me at Berghain, so don't. I don't do Berghain.
Okay, or other clubs that inspire you?
It's the political reasons. It's like, I don't know if anybody knows about the Berlin politics. If you play regularly at Tresor, then they don't book you at Berghain. If you play regularly at Berghain, then they don't book you at Tresor. And that's a little Berlin politics for you right now. Huh? Sorry? I mean, hey, yeah, it is what it is.
Hi, thank you very much for all the insight on your career and what's happening in your life nowadays with new projects and I wanted to ask you what kind of music you listen nowadays outside of the music you make yourself?
Sorry, what?
What kind of music do you like listening to outside of the music you produce yourself, as in listening other artists' music, and from that music you listen to, which artists have contributed?
What I listen to and what I play when I play out sometimes could be totally different stuff. Sometimes I like jazz. I grew up with jazz music. My father was a jazz musician, and my father put me up on a lot of jazz music. And sometimes I have a radio show on Blast Radio that on Sundays I play all of this music all this jazz fusion. Because, jazz fusion is great electronic music as well. I mean, people like Herbie Hancock and George Duke, Stanley Clarke. I mean, all these guys incorporated a lot of electronics in their stuff. And so, I mean, of course, I'm not gonna play, Billy Cobham or at the club. But I mean, I could. There might be an instance one day where I might could do that. But so what I'm listening to at home is just quite different, or what I just listened to is quite different. But at the same token, I do play sometimes, depending on the crowd, quite diverse set as well. I mean, I'll sometimes, if the crowd asks for one more record, I'll drop some drum and bass, so maybe they'll stop asking me for one more record. I don't know if you was at Wednesday night at Akasha, but we did something very interesting that night.
I am getting this signal to wrap things up.
We got to wrap.
So, Juan Atkins, thank you so much for joining me. It was really amazing speaking with you and hearing about your life, about your contributions to techno, and yeah, thank you everyone for being here.
Well, thank you. And it's glad to finally meet you, because now it just dawned on me where we spoke before.
Yes.
Yeah, because you've been at RA a long time. Yeah, okay. Thank you, guys.
Everybody.